North Point's been a big deal for us, and it's opened a world for our son that we didn't necessarily expect to find this young, and it's provided him with a level of education and happiness.
North Point School for Boys in Calgary offers programs from kindergarten to grade 10, with a specialty in outdoor education and boys education. They offer enriched programs in finance, engineering, and hockey. Sarah Pittard is the mom of a 12-year-old boy. When her family was moving to Calgary, she saw in North Point a school that could offer her son something he hadn't had before. That is, an inclusive, dynamic academic community and teachers who would take the time to teach him.
Sarah, would you tell me about who William is as a student and as a young man?
Absolutely. Will's a lovely, respectful young guy who absolutely loves mountain biking and basketball, and he's found a real home at North Point as a student. He's an extremely independent learner, and he likes to go at his own speed, and we've found that this has definitely been the best fit for us so far.
Tell me about North Point. What kind of school is it, in your words?
If I had to describe North Point, it's a lovely place. It's a very small school. It's in an older school building, and if you can look beyond that stuff, it's actually a very advanced school with a very modern take on learning, and especially learning for boys. There's a lot of outdoor time, there's a lot of get up and walk around when you need it time, and there's a lot more understanding of what boys need in education than we've seen in some of the other schools we've tried.
Is that part of what led you there?
Absolutely. We found North Point years and years ago when we were actually living in Toronto, and Will wasn't necessarily fitting into what traditional schools looked like. He wasn't great at sitting around a lot of the time, and he was just ready to go at his own pace and do his own thing. And we ended up coming out to Calgary and Canmore and Banff one summer and decided we loved it so much. We looked around, and once we found North Point, we knew that it was probably a lot better to make a home here.
Tell me about that moment when you were coming to that realization.
Well, it was interesting. We went to North Point and met with Brent DeVoe, who is still actually in charge of North Point and started the school. And right away, we got along really well. I think he really understood Will. He sat down and interviewed Will for about 45 minutes and showed us around the school. And I remember there was a point walking around the school when we started to check it out that they had an entire wall where the kids had dedicated their year to someone. And some kids had chosen a goldfish, and some kids had chosen their grandparents and their siblings. And I remember sitting there and reading them, and I just started crying, because I just thought that this was a place that would really help Will become who we wanted him to be, and would make him understand that education was important, but give him the fun stuff he was also looking for.
When you were coming to that realization that this was the place for you, what was the mission or the objective of the specific approach at North Point that you were really connecting with?
We liked the teachers. I think every teacher we met had just something really different to offer. There was a more experienced teacher, I'll say there, Mr. Reddick, who really specialized in things like ADHD and boys and learning. And Will never had any sort of diagnosis for that, but we sort of understood, just as many of the younger boys we knew at that point, he would have only been about 9 years old. He just wasn't necessarily going to sit in a classroom all day, every day. And then there were some younger teachers. Mr. Fagan had just kind of come in, and he's the social studies teacher. And he was really outdoorsy and adventurous. And he spoke to us about fly fishing and some of the trips the kids take at the school. And we just thought it was such a unique opportunity for him.
How has your relationship with the school evolved since those first encounters?
I mean, it's great. It's stayed great. I think the school is very respectful. I think one of the things we've really, really appreciated, and especially during, the past few months and going through what we went through with COVID, is that the teachers are available, and they're available at the drop of a hat. When we've had things go wrong that we weren't happy about, we were immediately able to reach people. When we just had concerns, we had people we could go talk to. And generally, we had people we could joke around with and have fun with, and who were polite and fun to see every day. One of the newer additions at North Point is Mr. Qureshi, who's a gym teacher, and he this year has introduced a ton of intramurals and teams for younger kids, kind of grade 6 and 7 and 8, playing basketball and volleyball. And he's just really involved a lot of the parents, and he's given us a window into what these kids are doing, and it's really neat.
What kind of community do you find around the school?
I think North Point's it's a little bit different than if you were going to go to a traditional neighborhood school. A lot of the kids are bused in. It's a much smaller school. But I think through the years, and we've been there, I guess this will be going on year 3, we've met a lot of different people just in different contexts. Every year the school heads on this really cool trip to Utah. And so this year, unfortunately, it didn't happen because of COVID, but the lead up to the trip did happen. And we met a lot of parents in kids of different grades there. We've met a ton of parents at, cheering for basketball and going out and watching the volleyball games. And North Point does some really fun events. So on Father's Day, there's a baseball tournament. So my husband has been able to go out and meet some of the dads. And on Mother's Day, there's usually a really nice luncheon and tea. And they try to sit you with people you might not necessarily know. So we've been able to find a lot of different people, and really it was nice because as things kind of happened this year, we were able to reach out to a lot of parents to kind of get the kids still socializing and having fun and making sure we were following the schoolwork right.
I'm wondering, is there something that you've experienced during, these COVID times? We're talking now in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. Is there something you've experienced going through this with North Point that brings out something about the culture or values of the school?
Oh, absolutely. We have another child. We have a daughter who is 10 years old, and our experience with North Point during COVID is miles away from what we've heard from other families and also what we've witnessed with our own daughter. Very quickly, North Point responded, and I remember it kind of going down right around what would have been the 2-week break for North Point. And we were all kind of given notice to take the 2 weeks and just prepare and spend time as a family and, talk to our kids about what was going on. And then day 1, that would have been the day back from school. Those kids were in school at 8:45 a.m. on Zoom. And that week we all learned that they would continue to do that. And so they went to school every single day until last Friday, and were taught on Zoom from pretty much 8:45 till 3 o'clock.
Sarah, you spoke a lot earlier about how much you valued the personal relationships with the teachers. How did that element come through this Zoom experience?
Oh, well, it really did it for me because there was a lot of get your mom and your dog out of the room. But I think for the kids, it really came through. I think the kids, in a real time of confusion and crisis, had the ability to go to these teachers. What was done is sort of Tuesday to Thursday was straight what the curriculum would have been, and Fridays the kids were given the opportunity to Zoom into the classrooms and talk to the teachers individually, which meant a lot because it made sure that they were going ahead if they needed to, or if they were behind and needed help, they had that too. And I know our son Will zoomed in every once in a while to talk about the Raptors and to talk about fishing with Mr. Fagan and to talk to Mr. Reddick about his hopes for the big Utah trip next year. And so I think it gave the kids just an extra outlet and an extra adult to kind of tell them that it was going to be okay.
How important is that side of the school experience at this stage in life for your children? The emotional development, it's going to be okay and this is a safe place?
It's big. It's big. I think, I think people with a lot younger kids are probably going through very similar things, kids that would be in kindergarten and grade 1. I know Miss Janet North Point is probably one of the most comforting people I've ever met, and she's never taught my son. But God, I go to her a lot. And I think for the older kids too, I think there were things that maybe mom and dad were really stressed about and things going on here that were weird. And, my husband went from working out of town Monday to Friday to working in the kitchen from 7 a.m. till midnight some nights, and there wasn't a lot of escapes. And I think being able to go to these teachers and talk to them was probably, you know, even to replicate the message that we were giving, that it was going to be okay and things would return to normal, was really important. And I think North Point really should be applauded in how normal they kept it. Our kids even wrote the PATs this week.
Wow.
Even given in Alberta, but they sat and wrote exams this week, either in school or they were allowed to do it from home.
I'm curious about, you know, this side of the emotional development and the safe space for learning. What does this side of things look like before COVID times?
Pretty similar, to be honest. We don't have the most athletic kid, and starting this year, I think he had real goals to join these teams and do these things that we never expected him to do. And he was really able to go to some of these teachers and talk about his fears and his level of confidence. And he actually really fell in love with basketball and has since, we actually have a basketball net now, and he's since been working out and doing all these things to prepare for next year. And I think it's a confidence he wouldn't have had if Mr. Qureshi wasn't there this year. And I think, you know, even with Brent, Mr. DeVoe being the principal, I know there's quite a few times that I've happened to have been in the school volunteering or doing things where I've seen kids go pretty quickly to him. And I know Will goes to him quite a bit too when they just need a break or a chat or some advice on how to handle situations. And from what I can see, the door is always open.
I think it speaks volumes that we've already discussed, you know, quite a cast of characters that you know each by first and last name. It sounds like these people play an important role in your life and your family's life.
Oh, they absolutely do. Every single one of the teachers at North Point does. And, you know, Will's in grade 6 now, going into grade 7, and we're really looking at high schools and trying to decide, and it'll be a very big adjustment for us to leave North Point.
How has your experience at North Point shaped what you're looking for going forward in terms of, you know, Will's education?
I think it's shaped what we're looking for both our kids in an interesting way, because I think that going forward, we're looking for different experiences. We're very specifically looking beyond the traditional. Even with our daughter, we've gone and looked at pretty traditional private schools, and it's not necessarily the fit for our family. We really like the idea that Will was able to express his interests and that those were taken further at North Point. And we're even looking for that now for our daughter, but it will affect high school too, because I think he's been giving a lot of leniency in a way to make his own decisions. And he's been very lucky to have gotten a little bit of an extra education in places where he is not necessarily in the grade 6 level, but he's a little bit advanced, and he's had the one-on-one, and it's gone the other way too. There's courses that he's not as strong in that they've dedicated some extra time to and taken away from the things he was already pretty advanced in to even him out more as a student. And I don't know, I think it'll be really hard to find again. North Point's looking at opening a high school, so I think that might be happening next year, but yeah, it'll affect what we look for even in universities now.
You think North Point may open a high school next year?
I don't know. Is that
what you said?
I think there's some discussion of it for sure.
Well, let's pretend if North Point were opening a high school, what would would you be in the lineup for it?
Oh yeah, absolutely we would. I think as these kids grow older, and especially having gone from grade 4 to grade 7 now, I think the importance on outdoor education is growing. I think North Point is taking a serious look at kind of grade 6, 7, 8, 9, and what they can offer these kids beyond just normal Alberta curriculum. And I think really if it grew, we'd probably stick with it for the long run.
It's an important point for those watching that, you know, we're talking about the school specializing outdoor education based in Calgary, you know, just at the gateway to the Rocky Mountains. What does it mean to have an outdoor education experience in that kind of context?
I mean, it's huge, and it's huge in a bunch of ways, because families from Calgary and families that live out towards Banff take their kids out, and their kids need to know a lot more than normal kids do in outdoor education. And, we're talking shelter building and bear spray and getting lost. And North Point really does have some unique experiences. They do once a year, they do Mountain Day, where none of the kids are made aware. And then one morning they go to homeroom and Mr. DeVoe rings a big, huge bell and they go out for a hike. And it's usually out to Barrier Lake or out in Kananaskis or Canmore. And it's big because it prepares them that, some of these kids might get a little stressed about it on the bus and not know the hike and not know what they're going to do outdoors. And when they get there, the kids are kind of split up into grades or groups, and they're allowed to go out and explore and try new things. And you sort of really need that living in Calgary and living in our area, because it's kind of what you do all summer, and you want some kids that are a little bit ready for it.
What does that do for the culture within the classroom and between the students?
I mean, it's interesting. I think I can only speak to Will's grade, and I can only speak to what I've seen, but Will started in grade 4, and there's still a very small class. There's been some kids come and go, and I think right now they're about maybe 10 or 11 of them. And it's a really interesting group because you can see there's some very athletic kids. There's kids that are at North Point for the hockey program. There's kids like Will that are just, the lovable nerd. And I say that positively because we're nerdy too. You can see Yoda there in the back. But, these kids, they learn to interact and they learn to be together because that's how the culture is. People aren't left out, and if things do happen, it's policed pretty quickly, and they're taught the most important thing that they're taught is the 5 R's, which involve, I don't actually know all of them, but one of them is respect. And the respect element is huge at North Point. And so I think these kids go out and they have to work together. And from what I can see, it's usually pretty good.
You mentioned the hockey program. Would you tell me a bit more about it?
You know what? I don't know much about it. I definitely don't have a hockey player at my house, but there is a hockey pep program. And I think what I love about the pep not that I really know much about it, but one of the things that happens is the kids go to SAIT to play hockey. SAIT is a university in Calgary, and the other kids go to SAIT and have the gym. Sometimes they have gym together and sometimes not. Because obviously they need time to do the hockey. And I think what that's actually done for our kid is that it's given him more space to grow as an athlete, which he needed to grow into, without, having kids that were really, really good at hockey, taking pretty good shots at him and killing the confidence. And I know this year for the first time there was a hockey intramural, and he played on a team with some of the older boys who were pretty dedicated hockey players, and they really, they held him up and they cheered him on, and their little team of 4 ended up winning it. And it was a big moment for our kid for sure.
Sounds like a specialized athletic offering, and also that flexibility for both kinds of boys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it works for everybody. And I think I don't know I can't imagine there's that many kids on the ice at once, but I know that a lot of the teachers at North Point have a real dedication to hockey. So my guess is that it's quite an experience if you're involved.
Are there any other specialized offerings on your radar at North Point?
Yeah, for sure. There's some of the things that we've found that are quite different. There's a financial academy course that happens usually on Monday, and it's a year-long project the boys work on. And then in June every year, there's a boys in business sale where they actually make the product, and they have to market it, invite their friends and family to come to it and sell their goods, and then have a wrap-up report, which is really important. There's a lot of banking conversations and money-saving conversations that go on that have carried to home that our kid has really tried to instill in stock markets and trying new things. There's also a STEM program where the kids go to kind of an engineering lab. So once a week, they'll bring home like a rocket or a plane or a car that works or something else. So I know last year we ended up picking up a soldering iron. He was so into it. And he's still doing that to this day, soldering things and fixing things around the house. So there's a lot of hands-on learning that happens that we haven't seen too many other places.
How often do you find yourself seeing Will, taking on a new interest or experiment or project and going, oh, that's thanks to North Point?
Oh, weekly. Absolutely. And especially during COVID. Once we kind of got stuck in the house and there wasn't that much to do, Will started saying, well, we did this or we tried this, and we found ourselves kind of ordering STEM kits and trying to replicate the experience. And it was funny actually, because we were really replicating it more for our daughter, but Will was able to come up with quite a bit of it for us. He also, through what he had learned at North Point and the North Point scheduling, was able to make our daughter an entire homeschooling schedule. And some of the programs they had used yearly at North Point, so like iExcel and a few of the math and science programs, he ended up setting up for her, so she had more to do. So we were pretty relieved about that.
On the technology side, North Point had already given him a foundation in some of these things. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. The kids at North Point, the technology is very important, and there's quite a bit of teaching that goes on in the classroom and quite a bit that happens with technology. So some of the English programs like Newsella, where these kids read, current newspaper articles and answer questions and do this. He already had the foundation and all of that, and he knew all the programs. And so he was really quickly able to set her up. And it was interesting because things like Newsella, as COVID went on, the kids were reading about it, and they were, at least in grade 6, I'm not sure kind of what younger or older did, but it was really brought up a lot of conversation in our house from things that Will had been shown by the school.
Sarah, I'm wondering, Will's 12 now. He's been there for 3 years. Those are some pretty key years in a young person's life. What kind of changes have you seen in your son that you credit to this school?
It's interesting because I think when Will moved to North Point, he was just not in a great place. We weren't happy with the school he was in. And he just wasn't fitting in. He had a really hard time with he was never a boisterous boy. He never pushed, and he never ran around and played. Like, he played, but he just wasn't all that into it and interactive. And I think really we've seen Will be able to socialize at a level that he wasn't necessarily able to at other schools. At North Point, the division line between grades isn't as set as you'd see at other schools. So a lot of the times, if he's headed to STEM, he'll go with the kids in like 6, 7, 8. And if he's in intramurals, he's doing that with a grade 9 and a grade 4. So he's really learned how to interact with older and younger kids. And I think that's built his socialization up quite a bit. So he's a happy, fun guy now, and we absolutely love what we've seen.
Sarah, I'm wondering if you could rank for me your 3 favorite things about North Point.
Oh man. I love the intramural program, which I don't know if that would be everybody's prime thing. I love the initiative that was taken this year in gym in general. So I would say that's a big one for me. I love the flexibility. We travel a lot. There's been a lot of times last year, we headed to Morocco for almost a month to celebrate Ramadan. And it was pretty understood, and it was allowed to happen. And Will came back and caught up, and it was great. And I love the teachers. I like the staff in general. I think, from the bus drivers to the people that help out around the school, everybody's there trying to build on the same ideals, and that really helps, I think.
If we were to look at Will's top 3 things, in your estimation, how would they be different?
I don't think they'd be that different. I know sports would be number 1. I know that Will's big concerns going forward are what will happen to sports teams, which is something, had you told me a year and a half ago, I wouldn't have believed it. Outdoor time for Will is really big. He really loves Fridays at North Point. I think they're called Fun Fridays. I don't know what they're called anymore, but on Fridays, the kids go out and they go on these big adventures, and sometimes it's like walking around the neighborhood and doing something, and other times it's out hiking, and so a lot of times it's rock climbing or bowling or just different things that we don't necessarily do with him all the time. So Fun Fridays would be right up there. And I think Will likes the community. I think for Will, I know with the town halls that I've sort of witnessed, because sometimes I help with the lunches. I think Will really likes the camaraderie of the school. I think he likes the feeling that he's got some brothers there and some older kids that support him, and he likes helping out with the younger guys too.
Sarah, I'm wondering if we were to, wave a wand and put you in charge of North Point tomorrow. So,
Yeah.
you're the principal, you're the boss. I want to know three things. So I want to know first, what's a strength that you would double down on?
Okay.
What's something challenging that you would work to improve?
Yeah.
And what's something totally different, totally out there that you would experiment with?
Okay. I would double down on the 5 hours. I think it's really important that they're doing it, and I think it's the right go. I wish I knew what they were. I always joke about how they're reduce, reuse, and recycle, but they're not. They're like respect and a few other things, resilience, all sorts of things that start with R's. And I think they are important. I think they give the boys a guide. I think there's a lot of times, and I know there's times Will's been in trouble too, where they've been able to point and say, hey, which one of the 5 R's should you be exhibiting, and which ones aren't you doing? And it's just been a really easy code of conduct for the kids. So I think I would double down on that. What was number 2? What would I change?
A challenge that you would work on.
I would change the physical building. I think North Point struggles with the size of the gym in particular. And I think as they grow, I would probably put a little more division in between some of the grades and just a little more space for everybody to hang out. I think right now they're handling it pretty well, but I think bringing in some bigger kids, you're eventually going to need a bigger gym. And then what was the third thing?
Number 3 was, an experiment, a wild card, something different that you would try in a perfect world.
I would start a girls' school next door.
And what would be the key things that you would carry over?
I actually would carry most of it over. I think a lot of the opportunities we give our son right now, we're not able to offer to our daughter, and it's hard. I think she'd be as into STEM, and I think, I think they could do a lot for a girls' school too. If it was not that, and I could do something crazy and wild, I'd probably make it a lot more enforced outdoor time. I think right now there's a lot of outdoor time and there's a lot of optional outdoor time. I'd probably take, an extra afternoon a week, have them outdoors twice a week instead of once.
Cool. Sarah, you mentioned the physical space. Let's dive a bit deeper into the critical side. Obviously you feel very strongly about how great a place this is, but if we were to take a critical look, what would be, maybe you can tell me more about the space issues, or tell me about some other things that you might try to fix.
Yeah, I mean, like, are there huge space issues? Probably not. I think there's a lot of neat space right now. There's a lot of bean bags and sitting around in different places. I love the idea of the learning commons. So I'd probably keep that as just a big room the boys can go hang out in and do work in. And I think probably because of the size of the school, you may end up with some noise issues and stuff like that, which if you were just in a bigger space, you'd have a little more control over. I have fixed the playground quite a bit, I think. We go to some playgrounds in Calgary that are getting better and better by the year, and some of these older school ones could use, a lot more wood and nature and netting and a lot less metal would be me. But I'd probably do that. Otherwise, though, I'm not sure I'd change very much. I think that, the interactions we've seen amongst the boys that have been negative have been dealt with very quickly. I think everyone's open to ideas. North Point's the kind of school where people go in all the time and say, hey, you know what, let's try this. And more often than not, I think those ideas are taken they're usually put into use. I think, they're building libraries, and they're listening to parents who want access to different types of books. And so, our kid has been reading things like The Hunger Games and Rick Riordan books for years. And I know now those kind of line the shelves. The kids are done books, they're leaving them there for other ones. So it's never been a type of school where I've felt like anything is, like any of the learning doesn't make sense or isn't modern or isn't taken with a newer approach. And so I guess I probably wouldn't change much else.
Thinking back to when you were first working on this decision, when you were faced with the decision of what's the right place for Will, what were the big things on your list when you just started looking?
I was trying to find him somewhere he'd be included, I think was the big one for us. I think he just wasn't one of these kids that was going to be that middle ground traditional kid that was an easy kid for a teacher to teach. I think he pushed boundaries a lot, and he asked a lot of questions beyond what was expected. And I think sometimes he was a little too challenging. And so I think with North Point, even when I remember, they do this shadow day, and I remember he went and did the shadow day, and he came home happier than we'd really seen him in a really long time. And I think the boys at North Point just are a little bit more forgiving and welcoming. And, I haven't seen a lot of kids, actually I haven't seen any kids with any discussion of being bullied because of shoes or clothing. Or so I think for us, it just felt like it was going to be that small school experience that was a really safe place. And that was enough for us at the time. And then, oh, sorry, there's a train going by. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but I think for us, as we've grown with the school, and I think the school in some ways has grown with Will, it's just evolved into a really good fit for us.
Tell me more about how the school has evolved alongside Will. Like what change has you seen take place?
We've seen a lot of changes, really. I think we were there, we weren't the earliest families, but we were amongst kind of a group of families that came in at the same time. And I think the school has, the teachers have switched around grades quite a bit. Not quite a bit, but at least a few of them were all moved this year. I think there was a little bit of a struggle to find a gym teacher that was a really good fit, which in my opinion, they now have gone above and beyond on. But I think it takes a really special teacher to want to teach at North Point and to be willing to do some of the extra work it really takes. Mr. Fagan and Mr. Reddick head out to Utah on their spring break for about 12 days with 20 boys. I'm pretty sure they don't get vacation pay for it. So there's a lot. I think there's a lot for all these teachers that, they go every year to a camp at the start of the year where the boys it's really where a lot of the socialization starts, is these camps that they go to from grade 4 on. And the teachers are organizing games and coming up with silly things and cooking dinner and for 3-4 days. So I think to really teach at North Point, it takes an extra bit of commitment.
Back when you were first working on this question of what's the right school for us, what was the question that you had to answer in regard to North Point? To, maybe a concern, something you were looking for? What was the question you had to answer before you're like, okay, this is the place?
Was it too weird? Was it too off the grid? Was it too non-traditional? I think that was a big concern. My husband's British and grew up in a very traditional British school. I'm a trained lawyer. He is an accountant. And for us, there was a real question of, was this school a little bit too weird? Was it going to give them too much independence and not enough learning? And would the focus not be on the curriculum? And I think we really quickly learned that the curriculum can be taught much quicker than it is at some schools, and it allows this freedom for the kids to do other things, which seems to make them quite a bit happier.
When you're talking to other parents, what are they asking you about North Point?
It's interesting. We get a lot of questions about it, and we've had a lot of friends switch their kids to North Point, and some have been really successful and some haven't. And I think, a few of the questions really revolve around how independent does your kid need to be? And I think as they get older, they do need to be able to handle a little bit of independence. And I do think the teachers support them quite a bit and follow their work, but you have to be a little bit more driven at North Point to succeed, because there's a lot of extra projects, and there's a lot, this year and last year there was an extra passion project that the kids could do a project on absolutely anything they wanted. And when you walked through that gym and saw some of these projects, you just saw that some of these kids are really, really driven and really, really focused on education. And it may be a struggle for some kids to keep up with that.
What did you observe that made you feel like that was the case, and that it was different than other schools you had looked at?
I think even in grade 4, we sort of really observed that Will had to sort of monitor what he was doing. And we had an experience last year where he sort of got really far ahead in a class and then coasted for a little while, and we didn't find out for a few months because he had kept the work up and was doing it, but not doing it to necessarily the expectations of that teacher or to North Point's expectations. And we were contacted and had a, pretty serious talk with him. And I think that's the thing, is that it's not this type of school where you're really sitting with a pencil and paper in front of a teacher who's staring down and looking at everybody's work every day. And so in some ways it's great, and for us it's been great. But I think for some kids it can be a little bit harder to get the focus and the work done.
Sarah, I want to be respectful of your time. Before I get out of your hair, though, I want to give you the steering wheel. And I'm wondering if there's anything that's on your radar that we haven't talked about yet, or something that I ought to ask you about, but I haven't yet.
This was a pretty good chat, I think we got a lot out. If I was giving advice, and I do all the time, and if people do want to reach out, you can probably just contact me through the school. I don't do anything on the parent board there. I'm not overly involved in that stuff, to be honest, but North Point's been a big deal for us, and it's opened a world for our son that we didn't necessarily expect to find this young. And it's provided him with a level of education and happiness that we're really happy about. And I think for people looking who may have, a different kid, whatever it is, if he's quirky, or, he has trouble focusing, or he's actually just so driven and wants to get ahead a little bit, or, I think there's room for those boys at North Point. And I think that's one of the coolest things. I remember when probably Will was in grade 4, we had a little Halloween party for him because we wanted to meet his friends. And I remember looking at my basement full of these boys and thinking these are the most eclectic group of kids I'd ever seen. And somehow it works. Somehow, the really sporty kids are encouraging him, and he's teaching math on the side some days, and, helping a friend who just wants an explanation and doesn't necessarily want to go to the front of the room or have to find a teacher. And I think there's a community at North Point that these boys have formed for themselves that speaks volumes to what they're teaching at that school, both in and out of books.
Sarah, I really appreciate you making time for us today.